Hey, welcome to Conversations Podcast. My name is Ben Dixon, and I not only run this podcast, but I also serve as lead pastor at Northwest Church in Federal Way, Washington. So wherever you're tuning in, thank you for tuning in today. Real quickly, before we get going here, I want to let you know where you can watch this. If you just go to YouTube, you can always watch this at Pastor Ben Dixon. Just type in my name, and there will be a playlist called Conversations. And you can listen to all of the past conversations and, of course, these ones that we'll be doing, which I'll talk about here in a minute. If you're just going to download the audio, you can go to Apple Podcasts or, of course, Spotify as well. And we look forward to having you not only listen and watch, but also subscribe and share. So thank you for doing that. If you forgot everything I just said, just go to bendixon.org, bendixon.org. And all the information about everything, that and more, is going to be there. So once again, thank you for tuning in. It has been 8 months since I did a podcast. Those of you that have faithfully followed or tolerated whatever I have put out there into the ether world and on the internet, you might know that it's been a very long time. And I am glad to be back, and I am coming back just for a short period of time. That's right. At our church, we're doing a sermon series called Jesus and Politics. I'm only going to do 4 or 5 sermons because I'm going to do about 6 to 10 podcasts. And these podcasts are going to be very simple and actually very short. And so here's what you can expect. I'm basically going to ask a simple question about politics and try to answer that as biblically and as clear as I possibly can. So that's what this is going to be all about. It's a conversation podcast, but it's going to specifically look through the lens of Jesus and politics. So if you want to follow this journey, keep paying attention to the podcasts that are going to come out over the next couple weeks. That's going to be through the end of August and September, and we might touch October, probably not. But there'll be 1 and sometimes 2 podcasts that will come out. So without further ado, I just want to let you know up front, here's what the question for today actually is for our podcast. And that is, why don't Christians engage in politics? And I have a friend with me today who may help us with that answer. And so this guy's name is Bern. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before, but we just want to know what Bernie has to say about why don't Christians engage in politics. What do you think, Bernie? He doesn't really have anything. He doesn't really have anything to say about that. Here's what I'd like to go with this. First, I just want to mention up front, this is what I truly believe, is that the mission of Jesus will not be fulfilled through our political engagement. However, this doesn't mean that political engagement is unnecessary or unimportant. We know that some people talk like that. Some Christians teach on that, but that's not what I think. And I don't think that's what the Bible teaches either. Some statistics tell us that 30 million Christians don't vote in any election, federal election, specifically for the president. Now, before I looked into the research on this, I would hear people say that stat, and I was like, I don't know if that's accurate. But here's a statistic that would help us understand whether or not we would agree with that. In 2020, the election between President Trump at the time and also our now President Biden, there was more registered eligible voters that voted during that election than in the last 120 years. And that was 67% of all eligible voters voted during that election. Now, if you think about that, that's 33% of all eligible voters did not vote for either party. That's 80 million Americans that could have and did not. Could 30 million of that 80 million be Christian? It's very, very possible. Now, what do we mean by Christian? That I do not know. But it's safe to say, I'm talking specifically now just to Christians, people that love Jesus, follow Jesus, believe the Bible. When we think about why people don't engage in politics, voting is one of those engagements, which we'll talk about in a different time. Why don't people engage? Well, before I go to those answers that I want to give you today, let me just give you some answers as to why the NPR stat, which is where I got the 67% from, when they asked people who didn't vote, this is what they said. 29% said they never registered to vote to begin with. So they weren't opposed to it. They just didn't register, and so they couldn't. 23% said they weren't interested in politics at all. 20% said they didn't like either of the candidates. 16% felt that their voice would never have made a difference. And 10% were so undecided and did not know who to vote for. So when it came to it, they just simply didn't cast their vote. Here's the interesting thing when you think about this. 80 million Americans, if they voted, let's just say half of them, if 40 million Americans voted in the next election, that would shift, that would absolutely change the outcome of any election, period. We have to recognize that. And so when we think about some of the responses that people give, well, my voice doesn't matter, my vote doesn't matter. The more people think that, the more that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes true because there's apparently 80 million people who actually somehow engage with that kind of idea. But here's my reasons. Why don't Christians engage in politics? Number one, we think that our political engagement doesn't matter. Very similar to the NPR stat. There's a couple reasons for this. People will say, well, if I vote, I live in a blue state, I live in a red state, it's not really going to matter, the Electoral College, whatever. There's also a theology. I call it the pan theology. Like, hey, everything's going to pan out. God has his way in the end. He's a sovereign God. So I don't need to cast my vote because it really doesn't matter and I shouldn't engage at all. Some people actually go as far as saying that all politics and political structures are demonic. I've actually heard that as well. So some people just don't think their political engagement matters, and they have a lot of reasons for that. The second reason is we think that Christianity and politics don't work together. I've been reading a book recently, actually a lot of books, but one of them is called Politics According to the Bible by the author. His name is Wayne Grudem, and it's a real thick book. I recommend that you read it. However, it's as thick as the Bible, so it's going to be hard to get through. But in the first section of the book, he actually goes over 5 wrong views of Christianity, church, and government. So he says that you can actually find that there are a number of wrong views that Christians have as they approach this topic altogether. And his goal was to actually help people understand how these views are wrong according to Scripture. And here's what they are. The first one is government should not compel religion. I agree with that. Government should not compel religion. The second one is government should exclude religion. Now, that's the way that some people would think, is that government should, like religion should have no bearing or no influence. Like people that call themselves Christians shouldn't have any say in government whatsoever. This is layered, and it has a lot of bad thoughts in it. Number 3 is all government is evil and demonic. That's some people's thought. Number 4 is let's just do evangelism and not politics. That's all that matters. Let's just get people saved. That's all that matters. Let's not care about politics. The other one is let's do politics, not evangelism. So politics matter, evangelism, not so much. So here's what's really important about this. He gives these 5 views and he says all of them are wrong, at least in part, if not entirely. And then he lands on a place that I actually really agree with him. And that is that our political engagement is not about overtaking the government, or it's not about constructing government, or any of those views that he had. Political engagement for the Christian actually should just be about influencing the government. See, if we pull out of any political engagement whatsoever, what ends up happening is whoever's values, whoever has the loudest voice, whoever has the most votes, we're allowing their values to become the laws of the land. And that's just something that we can't be okay with. And so when we think about this viewpoint, the summation of it anyways, where politics don't really matter, Christian and politics don't work together, we just have to understand that there is a place, a balanced place, where Christians can engage, should engage, but their engagement obviously has limitations. We should have a very healthy perspective of Christianity and Christians influencing government, politics, political leaders, because we believe in righteousness, we believe in scriptural truth, and that truth isn't just for Christians, that truth is true for everyone, and it does benefit everyone, and it does lead to everyone flourishing. Our theology as Christians should inform everything that we say and that we do, and it touches absolutely everything. And again, I'm not saying that we fulfill the mission of Christianity is to see the lost saved and disciples made through politics. I don't believe that at all. But I just think that part of the reason politics matter to us is because it affects our neighbor, and we love our neighbor on both a micro and a macro level. And so that was point number 2. Here's point number 3. We have real tension concerning political parties and politicians. So one of the reasons that we don't engage in politics is because we don't like either side, or we don't like any of the candidates. And the fact is I have found myself in this place many times where, and I'm there right now. I don't understand, as far as the presidential election is concerned, I don't understand how this is who we have today. I really don't. And I'm not dismissing these people as people. I'm just saying that as far as I can tell, I think that if we're looking at the highest office of the land, we need the person that is in the White House to be able to do the absolute best job for the entire country, because we have a major impact in the world. And so I can understand when people have real tension concerning political parties and politicians. Today, we have this two-party system of Democrats and Republicans. And I think a lot of us just long for there to be a different system altogether, where we're not looking through this filter of red or blue or right or left, but we're actually just voting on values. And it has become difficult to simply do that in the days in which we're living. So there's a tension that arises when we think about politics or we go to vote, especially because we're only pressed to think about it every so often. It's not like something that's pressing on us every day. And so I can understand that people have this tension, but it's not a reason that we should disengage. And we're just acknowledging today that it can be one of those reasons. And then the last thing I want to say is number 4, is we have become passive when it comes to the needs of our community. Politics must become more than agree, disagree of principles and perspectives. Politics is supposed to be about people. It's supposed to be about the flourishing of all people. We're talking about things that affect people's lives daily. Now, not all of our politics affect our daily lives, but there are a lot of things that do affect the basic rights and freedoms of all people that live in our neighborhood and our nation. And so for us to just be passive when it comes to our community, I think this is an approach that we simply cannot have. And I'll give you an illustration. Some of us live in a condo complex, or we live in a house in a neighborhood, and we have a homeowners association. And it's kind of amazing how these homeowners association, they have meetings. You can be elected to be on the board, and they meet maybe monthly or every quarter, and they make decisions for the entire neighborhood. And so what's kind of interesting is that they'll make decisions, and a lot of people, I think it's at least 2/3, don't attend these meetings. But everybody has something to say about the decisions that are made, even though they never attend the meetings. Now, I'm not trying to throw any shame on you, but at the end of the day, I've been one of those people, so I know that I always have something to say about the decisions that are made. But even though I could have been part of the decision-making process, I chose not to engage. And as a result of that, I'm left with an outcome I do not like, and I tend to criticize. And I think this is what has happened to so many people when it comes to political engagement, is we don't like the outcomes, but we're not part of the process. And I just want to ask you the question today, is that the right way that we should approach politics, knowing that in our country, that we have a government that's for the people, by the people, and we can be involved in the political process. We can vote, we can run for office, we can do all kinds of things. We can push back evil, we can let our voice be heard. We can do a number of things to influence the laws of the land. I'm not saying we control them, but we can influence them, and we should want to. We should care about that. But we shouldn't be those that don't do anything, and then when we don't like the outcome and the decisions that are made, just simply criticize because we weren't involved in the process. And we would feel that that would be negligent of us to not have been engaged, but then have a lot to say on the back end. And so I just want to put this out in front of us today, that in our looking at reason number 4, we become passive to the needs of our community. We should not engage only when it affects us. I gave this illustration in my sermon recently, and it was in our country, not just in our country, but in our state, and specifically in our county, there's a law that says that when somebody has stolen something from you, or perhaps they've gone into the store and they've taken some goods. They were a thief, and they get into their car and they drive off. Police officers are not even able to chase them because of the safety issues. Okay, right or wrong, agree, disagree. I disagree with that, but right or wrong here. So what happened was, even on our church property, we had someone come and smash a number of windows, and they tried to steal stuff, but obviously we don't keep a lot of stuff in our cars these days. And so a person came onto our property, smashed a lot of our windows, and they did the same thing to like 5, maybe 10 other businesses and churches in the area. The police officers found them at the local McDonald's, and those people just got into their car and they jumped on the freeway, and the police officers couldn't chase them. I mean, they did tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage. They stole all kinds of things, but our local authorities couldn't do anything about it. They just simply couldn't because of the law. Now, I can't tell you how many times I heard somebody say, that's terrible. That shouldn't be the case. The police officers should have been able to chase them, pull them over, whatever. But because of the laws of the land, they weren't able to do that. Now, it's interesting. I said this to our church, and I'll say it to you. A lot of times people don't really care about that law until something happens to them. And then they start to care about that law. See, they didn't think about all the other people that were being affected. But when our window gets smashed out and our law enforcement can't follow that person or do anything about what they've done to us, now all of a sudden we start to care. Now that's normal. That's what happens. But my plea is that we should care that it's happening to other people and not just when it happens to us. And that's why in our next podcast, we're going to talk about how then do we actually engage in politics in a reasonable way that isn't consuming our entire life. Like, Pastor Ben, what are you telling me that I can do and that I should do? And so that's going to be on our next podcast. But just for now, these are some reasons why people don't engage. And I think as we reasonably look at them, we should say, okay, this isn't enough. And I can be a responsible citizen and engage more, even just a little bit more than I currently am. And once again, the mission of Jesus will not be fulfilled through our politics, but that doesn't mean that we pull out. And so we'll look further at that in our next session together. God bless you guys. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. We have many more questions and answers coming on Jesus and Politics, conversation style. So stay tuned. God bless you.